A clip from William Lane Craig here and hear what he has to say on this particular video clip. This is from a debate that he had against Sam Harris, the atheist Sam Harris. Let's hear what he has to say. William Lane Craig here.
Ought implies can.
Okay, ought implies can. In other words, the commands of Scripture imply our ability to do the commands as they are commanded by God. Martin Luther, this is Martin Luther in his book, The Bondage of the Will, totally refutes that idea of ought implying can. He says, this, as I have before observed, is from the arguments of human reason, which thinks that a man is mocked by an impossible command. Whereas I say that the man by this means is admonished and roused to see his own impotency. In other words, when William Lane Craig hears the law of God or hears a command of God, he implies from it that we have the ability to do the command. Martin Luther says, no, when we hear the command of God, it demonstrates to us and gives us this idea of our own impotency, our inabilities to do that which is commanded by God. Luther goes on, wherefore the words of the law are spoken, not that they might assert the power of the will, but that they might illuminate the blindness of reason, that it might see that its own light is nothing, and that the power of the will is nothing. By the law, says Paul, is the knowledge of sin. He does not say is the abolition of or the escape from sin. The whole nature and design of the law is to give knowledge only, and that of nothing else save of sin, but not to discover or communicate any power whatever. For knowledge is not power, nor does it communicate power, but it teaches and shows how great the impotency, inability must there be, where there is no power. And what else can the knowledge of sin be but the knowledge of our evil and infirmity? For he does not say, by the law comes the knowledge of strength, or of good, or of the power of contrary choice, or ought implying can. The whole that the law does, according to the testimony of Paul, is to make known sin. And this is the place where I take occasion to enforce this my general reply, that man by the words of the law, ought statements, is admonished and taught what he ought to do, not what he can do, not what he is able to do. That is, that he is brought to know sin, but not to believe that he has any strength in and of himself. Wherefore, friend Erasmus, as often as you throw in my teeth the words of the law, this idea that ought implies can, so often I throw in yours that of Paul. By the law comes the knowledge of sin, not the power of the will. Notice this next phraseology. He says, heap together, therefore, out of the large concordances, all the imperative words, the words of command, into one chaotic heap, provided that they be not the words of promise, but of the requirement of the law only, and I will immediately declare that by them, these imperative words, these commands, is always shown what men ought to do, not what they can do or do. And even common grammarians and every little schoolboy in the streets knows that by verbs of the imperative mood, nothing else is signified than that which ought to be done, and that what is done or can be done is expressed by verbs of the indicative mood. Very important in Luther's theology. He's going to stress this idea of the difference between imperative texts of Scripture and indicative texts of Scripture. Imperatives are commands, ought statements, duty statements, obligatory statements. Do this, don't do this. Those are imperative statements. For example, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 is not an imperative statement. There are no imperatives. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is in an indicative mood of speech. It's a declaration of a fact. Okay, there are no commands in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. So Luther completely, he would totally rebuke this idea of ought implying can. Ought implies not ability. Ought is simply meant to show us our powerlessness. Okay? The next part, no free will equals no moral responsibility. Let's listen.
A person is not morally responsible for an action which he is unable to avoid. For example...
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. The presupposition behind William Lane Craig's statement is that free will, the power of contrary choice, is that which establishes responsibility. But that's not what the Scriptures teach. The scriptures do not teach, first of all, that man in Adam has a free will. He possesses an enslaved will. He is enslaved to sin, error, falsehoods, and lies. But let's go to what the Apostle Paul has to say about the prerequisite which establishes responsibility. This is Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3, and this is from the ESV, by the way. Again, the universality of sin right here, part of which is their throat is an open grave. That is, their speech, their words, the propositions that they spew out of their mouths are words unto death, essentially. They use their tongues to deceive. That is, they promulgate errant propositions as if they were true, and people believe them, these errant propositions, to be true. That is the nature of deception. Okay, deception is when you believe an error, falsehood, or lie to be the truth. That is the very definition of deception. But notice verse 19 right here. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped, and the whole world may be held accountable to God. Notice, accountability. Accountability is always to God. Responsibility, same term, same concept, is always to God. What is the prerequisite which establishes accountability? Right here, whatever the law says. The law is the prerequisite which establishes accountability, responsibility, culpability, liability, blame, and fault. These are all synonymous concepts. Law is the prerequisite which establishes accountability, not the power of contrary choice. Not the power of contrary choice. William Lane Craig is under the utterly fallacious, false teaching, the false presupposition that without the power of contrary choice, human beings can't be held accountable. This is false. Their power of contrary, their ability or inability to do whatever the law says is irrelevant to their accountability. It is what the law says. The law is the prerequisite for accountability. Okay? Their power of contrary choice is irrelevant to the issue of the establishment of their accountability. So there you go. Ought implies can. False. Luther refuted this idea, 1525, I guess, is when he published his Bondage of the Will. And free will, this title says no free will equals no moral responsibility. No law equals no moral responsibility. That's what it should say. Okay? Free will has nothing to do with responsibility. It's what laws are imposed, what commands are given, what imperatives are given, what ordinances, what prohibitions are given. That is what establishes accountability. So hope this is edifying. Didn't want to make this too long, but a few things to clear up here. Some big things regarding the monergist, Calvinistic position, that'd be my position, versus the synergistic position of William Lane Craig and other synergists. Well, let's hear his example real quick. Whoop. Somebody shoves
into another person. You're not responsible for bumping into him. You had no choice. But Sam Harris believes that all...
Well, I was talking about like secondary means and things like that, and direct causation versus indirect causation, etc. So I think we covered the main points that I wanted to cover here. That is that ought does not imply can, and it is the law that is the prerequisite which establishes responsibility. So post your comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking about that. These are fundamental synergistic assertions that are being made that need to be refuted and have been refuted over and over again. We'll talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.